Okay, so my watch says 10:20, so I guess it's time to get started. Hi everyone. I hope you're having a good day and that the conference has been good so far. And if you do think that it's weird attending a conference online, I tell you, doing a presentation online is really weird. You're sitting at home in your study, talking to yourself with headset on, and you're hoping that somebody's listening. So hopefully there's somebody at the other end watching what I'm saying. So the talk today is building a better GitHub Pages experience using Azure services. How hard can it be? But before we get started with that, I guess I'll just do a quick little thing about I'm Chris Klug. I work at a company called Active Solution here in Stockholm, where I do a bunch of different things. Mostly I am a developer, and I do software development and architecture, but I also do a bunch of public speaking and community work and try to stay up with the stuff that is interesting in tech. I've been doing it since 96, so I've been doing it for a while, and I think Azure is kind of one of the biggest changes in the way that I work. It's not something I talk a lot about. I tend to focus on other things than Azure in most of my talks because Azure has just become that one thing that's always there. Everything I build is Azure based, and I thought this talk is kind of a fun take on how Azure has changed the things that we do. So according to some people, there are only two hard problems in computer science. That's cache invalidation and naming things. But actually, there are three things I figured out. There are three hard things in computer science: cache invalidation, naming things, off by one errors, and choosing a blog platform. So I've been blogging for many, many years and had a down period and then came back and said, I'm going to start blogging again. And I asked the interwebs, I asked on Twitter, what's the go-to blogging platform of the day? What should I be using? And I got a lot of different suggestions. Ghost, and obviously you get a bunch of different tools out there. You get .NET Blog Engine, and so on. And there are lots of them. And I want to stick within what I know and what I feel like, because I do feel like tinkering with it. And WordPress is not really my thing. So I ended up actually choosing GitHub Pages. And I really like GitHub Pages because it's very simple. And as it says, it transforms your plain text into static websites. And that's kind of what it does for us. And I've started blogging on GitHub Pages, and I thought, wonder if I can't do that on my own and remove some of the caveats that you have with GitHub Pages. But I guess before we get started with GitHub Pages, I'm not sure that, my version of GitHub Pages, I'm not sure that all of you have worked with GitHub Pages, so I thought we'd just go through and say, what are GitHub Pages? What am I actually talking about? Well, the way that GitHub Pages works is that you get a Git repo, and in your Git repo, you put templates, so basically HTML with some mustache handlebar syntax inside of it. And then you put your blog posts or whatever content you want on your site inside of Markdown. And then you push that repo to GitHub. And GitHub then has some magic. It just picks it up, magically does stuff to it, and generates a website for you. So it generates a static HTML website. And then they put that website on a static website hosting plan that they've got. So it's basically you get your own free website and they do all the builds for you. And that's kind of cool. It is. And the magic part, like the book here, is actually Jekyll. So Jekyll is this Ruby-based static website generator. It takes, as I said, templates with Markdown in it, so HTML and handlebar syntax, and your Markdown files, and merges them in and generates a static website for you, which you can use for websites or you can use it for blogs, which is where I'm using it. So Jekyll is kind of cool. So if we look at GitHub Pages, the features that you're getting, you get automatic static site generation. So basically, you push your code to GitHub, and GitHub will just go and generate a website for you. That is nice. Very nice feature. Free website hosting. So they don't charge you. So hosting my blog on GitHub is literally 100% free. There's no cost involved in running GitHub Pages, which I really like. I'm cheap. They do support custom domains. So I'm not running it on a GitHub Pages domain. I'm actually running it on my own domain. So they do support custom domains. And they also support, which I really, really like, automatic TLS support. So basically, you just tick a box and say, I want to support SSL. And they will generate a certificate for you. And they will even generate a certificate for you for your custom domain. So even though I'm running on a domain called fearofoblivion.com, they will generate a certificate for me to do SSL encryption for my website, which is really like. But what I don't like, the caveats of running GitHub Pages, is the repo must be on GitHub. Not a big problem. I don't mind that. I use GitHub anyway, but I also use DevOps, and Bitbucket. But I don't care. GitHub would be fine. My main problem is that it has to be named. So the repo that we're using must be username.github.io. So that means that there can only be one repo with that name for each account, which means that you can only have one website per account. You can have multiple ones. You can actually do multiple GitHub pages, as far as I understand, one per project, but not if you want to have a custom domain that actually ends up at a slash something. So you can't really have one default website, more than one default website for your account. And you cannot customize the Jekyll pipeline. So when you start doing GitHub pages, you get some templates for Jekyll, so you can just choose the template that you want. But if you want to, you can go and say, hey, I want to have my own custom template, which is good. And that's what I did. I found a template that I really like. The problem is that a lot of these third-party templates that people have built use little plugins to enable different features. And since we can't modify the Jekyll pipeline in GitHub Pages, it means that we can't really use all the template features that we want. So I actually had to take a template and run it through GitHub Pages a couple of times and remove things and figure out what I could and could not use, because some things are supported and some are not. So being that we don't control the Jekyll stuff, it gives us some limitations. So I thought I can build that with Azure, right? I should be able to do that. So I went and looked. So automatic static site generation. Yep, can do that. Azure DevOps with some Jekyll sprinkled on top of it. That's not a problem. Free website hosting. Well, pretty much, almost free at least, because Azure Blob Storage supports us putting stuff in there, and you pay almost nothing for your website. Support for custom domains. Yes, not a problem. Blob Storage supports custom domains as well. Can do that as well. Doesn't cost anything extra. Automatic TLS support. So Blob Storage kind of supports TLS, but only if you use the Blob Storage generated domain name for it. So if you want to have custom domains, then TLS support is not built in. However, Azure CDN supports fronting Blob Storage and adding TLS with custom domains. So CDN will solve that. Repo must be on GitHub. Nope, can put it wherever I want. That's not a problem at all. Repo must be named username.github.io. Nope, not at all. We're not even stuck with GitHub, as I said, so that's not a problem. And no customization of the Jekyll pipeline. That's gone as well, because we now run the Jekyll stuff on our own. We're doing the static website generation in our own pipeline, so we have full control. So we remove a bunch of the caveats, and we fulfill all the things that we are getting almost. It's not completely free, but it's almost free. So what I'm going to be building today, and I want to show you how to build this, is it's going to be the same thing. I do a Git repo, I push that to some form of Git repo. In my case, I'm going to use DevOps to store my code. Then DevOps pipelines picks that up and sees, hey, it's been a push. The pipeline then goes ahead and uses Jekyll to do the static site generation. But I'm not a Ruby person, so I don't know really honestly how to run Jekyll. But there's a Docker image for that. So I'm going to have the pipeline run Jekyll through a Docker image, because I know how to use Docker. And then once it's generated a static file, I'm going to push the resulting files to Blob Storage to do my website hosting. And if we look at the web request, it's going to be, you come from the internet, you're going to hit Azure CDN. And the Azure CDN is then powered by Azure DNS, because I have my DNS lying in Azure, so I can control my DNS up there. And we're going to have SSL enabled, because Azure CDN actually supports creation of SSL certificates, even for custom domains. And then that is going to front my blob storage that contains my website that was generated by DevOps. However, I'm also going to extend my blog beyond just static website hosting. So I'm actually going to add commenting functionality using Azure Functions. So when you add a comment, or you go to a blog post and you look at the comments, it's going to use Azure Functions to get the blog posts, get the blog comments, and also be able to add comments. And those functions are going to add and read comments from Azure Table Storage. Because I've already got a storage account for my files, I might as well just use table storage as well. So yeah, that is a lot of stuff, but that's kind of the cool stuff with Azure. You take the little pieces, you put them together, you configure them, and all of a sudden you have this much bigger, cooler solution. So in the end, we're going to have something like this. I'm going to use DevOps, repos and pipelines, Docker, Jekyll, blob storage, table storage, functions, CDN, DNS. We're going to be working with HTML, JavaScript, CSS. We're going to have some Markdown in there, TypeScript, YAML, Node. I'm going to use a Node as well, so Node and NPM, and also Git. And I'm also going to use a tool called Pulumi to generate all of my infrastructure, because I really like the idea of Pulumi and infrastructure as code. So let's just go ahead and start building something, because I have a lot of stuff to show you. So let's go ahead and just build something. So I'm going to go over to my terminal here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directory for my Pulumi stuff. So I'm going to mkdir Pulumi, and then I'm going to step into Pulumi. And in here, I'm going to say Pulumi login file : / dot. So Pulumi has this idea of infrastructure as code, but it's actually real code, not DSL, not markup, not XML. It's literal code. So I'm going to use TypeScript to generate my things. And then Pulumi stores its state, so basically what is already available. It doesn't poll and ask Azure what's up there, but it keeps track of what it's done before. And then whenever I make a change to my infrastructure, it compares what it did before with the new state and then makes all the necessary changes. And to do that, you need to store that state. So what I'm telling Pulumi here with Pulumi login file is that please store your state locally in this folder. I wouldn't recommend doing this normally. If you want to do this for real, you should probably store your state in some backing store like Amazon S3 or Azure Blob Storage, or even use Pulumi's service where they host the state for you. But for this demo, I'm going to store it locally in my project. Then I'm going to say Pulumi new Azure TypeScript, because that's what I'm going to be running. I'm going to build some Azure stuff using TypeScript. Name of my project, Azure Pages Demo. Description of the project, really don't care. Stack, so stack is literally one setup of infrastructure. So you can have many different stacks to set up your production environment and your dev environment and your UAT environment, and they can all have different configuration. I just need one stack. I'm going to call it dev. That works fine. And the password. And we do that again. There it is. So for the password, you can store secrets inside of your state. And it also, any secrets that come out, inside your configuration, but also inside your state, there might be secret things. So everything that should be secret that you generate and create and things like that, like if you generate passwords and things, those are actually, the state is encrypted using your own passphrase. So not everybody can just pull down the state and figure out all of your secrets. Then we need to tell it where to go. I'm going to go with Azure Public, and I want to put it in North Europe. Got that right. Then it's going to install a bunch of Node stuff because I'm doing TypeScript, as I said. That should be pretty fast. There it is. It's installed, ready to go. And then I'm going to say Pulumi stack select dev to select that I'm going to be working with a dev stack at the moment. And then I'm going to do one more thing. So instead of having to put in my passphrase every time I do a Pulumi thing, what we can do is we can say, we can do that. So I can set an environment variable called Pulumi config passphrase. And now I don't need to input the passphrase every time I do something, which is quite nice. And then I happen to know that I need a couple of more npm packages. So I'm going to install npm install at Azure /arm cdn, because I'm going to do some CDN work. That should install that package for me. And then I'm going to install also Azure storage, because I'm going to be doing storage stuff. That's installed. And then I'm going to open up code so that I can do my coding. So what we get here, I'm going to make, let's see here, we open up the Pulumi thing. I'm just going to make one change. There's a strict thing in here that I actually like to remove because it causes some issues with some of my simpler scripts that I'm doing, because I'm doing a demo, not production code. I'm just going to remove the strict to simplify the demands on my TypeScript. So what we got here is we got a Pulumi YAML file that contains the information about the project, telling us like, this is what the project is all about. So you can see the name and the description that I didn't put in. And then there's a pulumi.dev.yaml that is a stack. So basically a stack here, it has a YAML file, and for each one of the stacks, there are different settings. And then I can go back out here and we can say Pulumi config set project name Azure Pages demo, like that. And all that really does, it adds that here. So it basically gets project name, prefixes it with my project name, and then adds the value in here. And if you don't want to do it through the terminal and go Pulumi config set, you can actually just go in here and add the text in here. The cool thing about doing it with the terminal is that you can actually add -- secret, and it actually encrypts the values for you. So if you have secrets in there, you can do that as well. And the final part I need to check before I get started, I'm just going to do AC accounts show. Nope. So AC account show. So Pulumi actually piggybacks locally on my machine using the Azure CLI. So I'm just going to verify that I am using the correct Azure account, which I am. So I should now be good to go to start doing my coding. So in here, in my index that I get when I generate the site, we see that it imports some Azure stuff and some Pulumi. It creates a resource group and a storage account. It exports a connection string. I'm actually going to go and delete that and just keep that. And I'm going to go ahead and say add this. So Pulumi config basically pulls out the current configuration, which is what's in this dev YAML file here, because it knows that I'm running with the stack dev because I selected that. So if you have many stacks, it's going to pull out the corresponding YAML file. And then I'm going to pull out the project name from my YAML file. So I have that. And then to create something in Azure, you just go and say, hey, azure.core.new azure.core. In this case, resource group. But I'm going to name it project name. However, I'm also going to do this, and I know that people might not agree with me, but I'm going to add project name here as a name as well. So the first part is the name that Pulumi uses to recognize that what I'm creating and remember what I created. And this is the name of the resource that gets generated in the cloud. And if I don't set that manually, it actually uses this name plus some random characters, because we should treat infrastructure as cattle, not as pets. So we've got that. And then I'm going to need two environments because I want to have a blog that is serious, right? So I want to have a staging environment and a production environment. So to do that, I'm going to add a new file in here. I'm going to call it website environment.ts, like that. And inside the website environment, I'm going to go and create a very basic outline. So it's just a class here. Imports Pulumi, Azure, creates a class. That's it. Then I'm going to go and add a bit of code. I know there's a lot here and I don't want to type it. So creating a constructor that takes a resource group, the project name, and a potential suffix that's nullable. It generates a name of the website environment using the project name. And then if there is a suffix, it goes -suffix, otherwise nothing. And then I tell it, hey, I need a storage account. So Azure storage account, this is the name of it. Here's the name of the storage account, which cannot contain dashes, and it cannot be, it's case sensitive, can only be lowercase. I tell it to put it in the same resource group that I just passed in. I tell it to be a standard, local redundant, HTTPS traffic only, and then I tell it to be a static website. And here is the index document in my 404. And then I give a couple of properties here so that I can get information about my environment. And since it won't know the primary web endpoint and the primary connection string until Azure has actually created the resource, those values are asynchronous. And to be able to get those values out through this thing here, you can see that it uses something called pulumi.output of string. And that means that it knows how to handle the fact that these values are not done and not available until the resource has been created in the cloud. There's a little bit helper stuff from Pulumi to get the asynchronous stuff working. I'm going to go back out here and I'm going to do import from /website environment website environment. And then down here, I'm just going to go and do that. So I'm going to create 2 website environments, and that is then going to create two storage accounts for me. One that's just named the same thing as the project, and one that's the project name -staging. So that's the storage part of my website. But as I said, I cannot add custom domains and TLS on top of that, so I do need CDN as well. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a CDN profile. So once again, it's just new Azure CDN profile, name, where to put it, and what SKU to use for my CDN profile. So I'm going to use the Microsoft standard SKU. That works fine for me for this demo. And then once I have my CDN profile, I'm going to say prod environment.add CDN endpoint. I'm going to pass in the CDN profile, and I'm going to pass in 0, 10, 0. So basically, please use the CDN and please cache it for 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and create that endpoint, or that method. Move that down there. And I'm going to change that to duration, and I'm going to make it optional, like that. So now I have a method on my environment. So I'm really building code here, even if I'm creating infrastructure. So in here, I'm going to do this. There's a lot of code here. I just need to create that property, make it private. That. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a CDN endpoint, giving it a name, putting it in my resource group, telling it what profile to use, telling it what host header to use. I'm telling it that, hey, when people request stuff, you can find it in blob storage. Here is the blob storage account that you should use, so the web endpoint. And then here's a global delivery rule saying that if I passed in a duration, use that duration, no matter what you're getting from the back end when it comes to caching. And if I didn't pass it in, just bypass it. So for my staging environment, I won't be caching, but for my production environment, I will. And then there's a delivery rule down here saying that, hey, if you're coming in on HTTP, could you please do a permanent redirect to HTTPS? So I can have the CDN automatically change from HTTP to HTTPS using a delivery rule. And then I'm just going to go down here and expose some more information. So once again, I have a couple of properties here. They use Pulumi interpolate to basically figure out the information I need. So I get the URL to the CDN. And then if I ever want to purge the CDN, I need to run this Azure CLI command because I can't purge it from Pulumi at current point at least. So for that, I'm going to use this AC CDN endpoint purge command. And to make that a little bit easier to work with, I'm actually exposing that as a property as well with all the names filled in, the resource groups and the profile names and all of that, so that when I've run my Pulumi stuff, I get this command on screen that I can just copy and paste and use whenever I want to purge it. So that's kind of neat. And with my CDN in place, go back out here, we'll do staging environment.add CDN profile. I'm going to pass in a CDN endpoint, and I'm going to pass in a CDN profile, but I don't want a duration for my staging environment because I don't need that to cache anything. It doesn't need to be high performance. So that's, now we've got storage, we've got CDN in front of it, but we don't have a custom domain. So I need to go and create a custom domain for my CDN endpoint. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in here to my add CDN endpoints. I'm going to add a bit more code in here. I'm just going to add this, make that private property. Sorry about scrolling up and down. So what I'm creating here is, once again, Azure's DNS CNAME record, telling Azure that I want a new CNAME record. This is the name of the record that I want, which is going to be the name of the environment. And then I happen to have my DNS in Azure already. And the DNS zone that I'm working with is placed in a resource group called DNS. Set the time to live. Zone name is going to be zerocall.com for this. So my address is going to be azurepagesdemo.zerocall.com. And then I tell it what target resource to use, so basically point towards my CDN endpoint. And finally, I tell it that the parent for this thing is the endpoint. So unless I have the endpoint, this thing can't be used. So I need to wait for that to be created. So that's automatically going to create a CNAME record for me. So now I have the CNAME record and I've got the CDN, but I need to connect those two. And there's a little problem with that. That is not supported by Pulumi out of the box, but I Googled it and there's a demo for that. So on GitHub, there's a bit of code that demos how to connect those two using Pulumi stuff. So I copied that code. I was going to create a new class here, CDN custom domain.ts. So I just copied that code, and yes, I'm sorry, there's a lot of code here, but it's all just copied from a GitHub page. I just Googled CDN custom domain Pulumi, and I got this. So I copied this code here, and it shows us how we can create custom things in Pulumi as well. So if it's not supported, we can add our own implementation, which is really cool. And once I've got that in place, we can go and use that. So I'm just going to do Pulumi 10. I'm going to create a new custom domain resource that needs to be imported. So we'll do import from / it doesn't find it for some reason, cdn custom domain dot, no, just like that. And then we'll do cdn custom domain resource. So this is a custom domain resource thing. It's a custom built Pulumi resource. It says what domain to use, the CDN profile, the CDN endpoint, the HTTPS enabled because I only want HTTPS, what resource group everything is put in, and then adds a parent on that one as well, saying that, hey, this cannot run without the CNAME record. So this actually defines everything I need. I got the storage, I got the CDN, I've got the CNAME record, I got the CDN custom domain set up. That's all I need from my Pulumi stuff, except for one thing. Down here at the end, oh, I need one more thing. Sorry, I need one thing here. I need Pulumi, that thing. So I need the URL. So I just want the CNAME records, fully qualified domain name, adding https:// to it, and removing the last thing because it adds a dot at the end for some reason. And then out here in my index, I'm just gonna go and export some properties, and everything you export from your index.ts file in Pulumi is going to get added to the state for your stack, so that you can then go and say, hey, for my stack dev, can you please give me the latest staging storage URL, or can you give me the staging URL, and so on. It all gets saved with your state, which is nice, and it gets output on screen. Now that I have my Pulumi stuff, I can go back out here and I can say Pulumi up, basically bring up my environment for me. It's now going to go through all of my code and it's going to look at the code that I generated. So it's going to run my TypeScript and see whatever my TypeScript generates and compare that to the current state, which is nothing. And it figures out, hey, I need to create this and 11 other resources. So here's a bunch of resources that we need to create. We can look at the details, or we can just go, yes, please create those for me. And then Pulumi is going to go into the background and do its thing and just create all of the resources that we need. And that's going to take a little while. So while that runs, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go and I'm going to pull up the terminal here. I need another terminal. Then I'm going to say git clone, and I do think I've got that in here. That's the one. So I'm going to clone my actual website. This is my regular website that I run today on GitHub.io. I'm going to move it over to this at some point. And that downloads the whole website for me. I'm just going to do, I'm going to remove the .git folder, recurse. So I'm just going to remove because I don't want that to be a Git repo. It comes with my package. So this is my website. It has the markdown for my posts. It's got the layouts for the looks and feel of my website. I just need to make one little change here, and that's by default, the links in Jekyll doesn't contain .html at the end, which causes some problems with running it in storage. So I'm just going to say, hey, can you please add .html to all the links inside of your application on this application? That makes life a lot easier for me. So that's the only change I'm doing. I'm changing that link thing, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to create a new repo. There it is, and I'm just going to do an initial commit like that. Add that. So now I've got my code. I've got Pulumi setting up the infrastructure. I've got my code for my website. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add an Azure pipeline. So Azure pipelines are YAML based. For good and bad. I'm not a big fan, but that's the way it works. So inside here, I'm going to go and I'm going to create a pipeline, and it's going to have a trigger. So basically, whenever I push to master, it's going to run this pipeline. I set up this variable called Azure Pages demo because I can use that in different places because that's a variable that I'm using in a few places. And then I set up 3 different stages. I have a build stage where it generates the website and creates the website, static website for me. Then there's a release to staging that releases it to the staging environment. And then there's release to production, which will run once I've approved the application running in staging. So for building it, that's actually not that hard. So the build part is going to contain a single job called run Jekyll, and it has a display name, and I'm going to run it on Ubuntu. I could run it on Windows as well because it's still Docker, it doesn't matter, but I'm really running Ubuntu in this case because it's default. And then I'm going to add some steps in here. So we'll do first step, run Docker. And I want to show you this. There's a long command in here. So what I'm doing is I'm running Docker and I'm mapping a couple of volumes in here. So I'm mapping the sources directory / site, which is then obviously going to be this site here. I'm mapping that to a path at srv Jekyll source. Then I'm mapping another Docker volume, which is the artifact staging directory in my pipeline, to srv Jekyll destination. Then I'm telling Jekyll to run rootless, otherwise I'm getting some permission issues. I'm telling it to run the Jekyll Docker container, Docker image. I'm telling it the command to run is Jekyll build, and please build using the sources located in this URL, which happens to be this that I mapped in. So basically it's using the site from my repo. And destination is srv Jekyll destination, which is what I've got here. So basically I'm telling the container to read from this folder and output it to this folder, my artifact staging directory, but it does it using a container. Then once it's been built, I'm going to publish my artifacts. So I'm running a publish artifacts, telling it to publish the artifact staging directory, and I'm naming it site. So basically, here's the site, put that as an artifact for me. Once I have my artifact, I'm going to go to my release to staging, and I'm going to run a job in here. But it's actually a deployment job in this case, not a build job, and it's called deploy to staging. I'm running it on Windows, and the reason for that is that for my releases, I am running the Azure CLI, at least for the production one, and that doesn't work on Linux today, so I need to run it on Windows. So I'm changing VMs here. So I'm going from Ubuntu to Windows between my things. I'm deploying it to staging, which is an environment, which is just a tagged name of something. And I'm going to run a run once deployment with a couple of steps. And I'm going to run, it's actually just one step. So for the staging deployment, I'm actually just doing a publish website. So I'm doing an Azure file copy, copying everything from my workspace / site, which is the stuff that I generated up here, this thing here. And I'm copying that to an Azure Blob Storage, to the name of the storage account is going, or a storage service is going to be that. And I'm using an Azure subscription, which I'm going to set up in DevOps to say that here is how you access this thing. And please copy it to this magical container, which you have to use when you're building a website or static website in your container or in your storage, sorry. That's all I have to do. So one thing builds it, puts it into an artifact, the publish to staging copies it to my blob storage account. And for production, I'm doing pretty much the same thing. This task here is pretty much identical, except that I'm copying it not to a staging named storage account, but to the normal one. And then at the end of production, I actually do a purge CDN. So in here, I'm going to go back out here. Now you can see here, Pulumi is done. And one of the things that Pulumi did, it outputs all of my outputs or my exports here. And one of those is Azure Production CDN purge command. That was the one that I set up as a property. If I copy that and add that in there, this thing now knows that once I've deployed to production, please purge this CDN, which is going to be, it takes a while, trust me. So that's about it. That's actually all I need. Build, push to staging, push to production, purge my CDN. I'm going to go to this and I'm going to do added release pipeline. Because that's what I did. Yes, now I'm checking in the Pulumi state as well, which is probably not a great idea, but hey, it works. Now I've got that. I need to push that somewhere, but I don't have anywhere. I don't have a repo. So I'm going to head out to Azure DevOps. I'm going to create a new project in DevOps. Azure Pages demo. that. It's going to be private. I'm going to create that and hope it doesn't take too long. Hope it doesn't take too long. There it is. I'm going to go to my repos. It's nice enough to tell me everything I need. I'm going to use SSH. So I'm going to copy those SSH commands to add my GitHub repo. I'm going to go back to my terminal, paste in that thing to add my remote to be Visual Studio, and it's going to push everything for me as well. And if we go back to the repos, we refresh that, you can now see all of my code is up here. Sweet. So now I have everything in place, infrastructure's up and running, I've got my code in here, my pipeline is written, I just need to add it. So I'm going to go to pipelines, create pipeline, and this is a bit weird. Yeah. You go Azure private, you choose that thing, and then as part of your configure, you do existing. I would have liked that to be the first thing that you select, but I don't get to choose. I choose my Azure pipeline YAML file, do continue. It's going to look like this. So this is what I created, and that's all good. I'm going to save that while I remember it. Keep forgetting to save it. And one thing that I mentioned before is that I'm using a couple of things. I'm using environments in here, and I'm using an Azure subscription. I need to configure those in my my DevOps to get that to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to project settings. I'm going to go to service connections, and I'm going to create a service connection for Azure Resource Manager, Service Principal Automatic. I'm going to name it Azure Pages Demo. That's going to load all of my Azure subscriptions, and I'm going to use that one. I'm going to choose my resource group. I'm not switching that. That's the one that I want. You be me. And this is now going to identify me, and I have rights in that Azure account, so it's going to set up the connection. Now I can go and say, look at that, Azure Pages Demo. That's the stuff that's the resource group that Pulumi created for me. Save that. Now I have that service connection that my Azure pipeline expects to be there. Hopefully soon. There it is. So now I have my my service connection. And the second thing that I was using inside of my pipeline, if you look at the pipeline here, we're going to this. So that would be me setting up this thing here. So Azure subscription is now, there's one called Azure Pages Demo, which is fine. The second part is that I'm deploying to production and staging. And I don't want to deploy to production straight away. I want to have a manual intervention here. So I'm going to go to environments, and it's already picked up production and staging from my build script or my pipeline. So for the production one, I'm going to go and I'm going to select approvals and checks. I'm going to add an approval, and I'm going to add myself in here. Great. That means that before anybody sends anything or deploys anything to production, it needs to be approved by all approvers, which is me. Which basically means, hey, deploy it to staging, that's fine. But then once you want to deploy it to production, then it needs to be checked first. With that in place, I should be able to go in here, press run pipeline. Master run. That's now going to run, generate the websites, deploy to staging, and then it should stop there and then do deploy to site or deploy to production. While it's doing that, which takes a little while, I'm actually going to go and fix that last thing I was talking about. I want to have commenting in here. So I want to be able to add comments to my blog posts. So I'm going to go to my site. Actually, no, I'm going to go to Pulumi first. Then inside Pulumi, I'm going to create a new file. Now I'm going to create a get comments handler.ts. And the cool thing here is Pulumi can set up Azure functions for us. So that's built into Pulumi, which I really, really, really like. It's a little bit dirty, and for a real production thing, I would probably build my functions separately in its own project. But for quick little things like this is actually quite cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an Azure function here. As you see, I import HTTP requests from Azure Functions, Azure Storage. Then I'm creating a constant export here for a get comments handler, which is a function that takes a context and the request and returns a promise with the response of a status code and some body. So I'm creating a new promise, getting my connection string to my table storage. I'm going to look if it is staging. I'll create that method in a second. And then depending if it's staging, I'm using that environment variable. It's going to contain the connection string to my staging environment. And for production, it's going to be that environment variable. Then I create a table service so I can talk to table storage. Then I verify if the table comments exists. If it doesn't, then I just return empty array because nobody has added a comment yet to the entire web application. But if there is a table called comments, I'm going to call this helper method to basically go and recursively get all of the comments for that blog post based on a parameter called post ID. And then I'm going to return that as an array of JSON objects containing the comment body, the who commented, and the timestamp. And little helper methods that I need here is I got isStaging, and this is ugly, I know, but it actually works. So basically, if there is a header called referrer, which there is going to be if the website is making the request from a website, if it contains staging as part of the referrer, then I'm in the staging environment, so I return whether or not that is available. If there isn't a referrer, then it's going to be true because, I don't know, that might make sense. It could be false as well, I don't know. I just chose true. And the get comments recursively is literally that. The problem is that with table service, if there's a lot of comments, it will not get you all comments straight away. So it's going to give you a set of comments, and then you might get a continuation token. So basically here is X amount of comments, but I'm not going to give you all because there are too many, and then I have to go and get them once again. So I basically recursively, every time there's a continuation token, I go and ask for the next set and the next set and the next set until I get all the entries from table storage. So that's my comments handler. That's going to be one part of it. I'm just going to call that, and it's going to return all of my comments as JSON objects. And then I need a add comments handler.ts to actually add stuff, because I need to be able to add comments to be able to read them, right? So I have this handler here. Still, once again, lots of code, but it's very, very similar. Add comments handler. All of this is exactly the same. Connection string is the same. Create table service is the same. But it calls a create table if not exists, because I always want that table to be there so that I can add my comments to it. And once it's added the table, I generate this entity to put into my table where the partition key is the post ID. So I partition it based on the identifier of the post that I'm looking at. Row key is the current date so that I can get them in order. And then I have a body and a commenter. So my comments are really, really simple. They're just two strings. It's like who commented and what did they say. Then I insert that into my comments table. And once it gets inserted, I return a 200 and I return my comment in the same format that I would when I get them all in an array. That makes it easier for me to work with. And it uses the same isStaging function down here. So now that I have two handlers like that, they're really nice. I love the fact that I can just quickly whip these up and make functions work in Azure in a very nice and simple way. The last thing we need to do is we need to add them to Pulumi. So what we'll do is we'll go to index here. And we'll go in, I think, here. I'll do functions. Functions, that's the one. Oh, need to import them. So we're going to do get comments handler. That didn't come out right. Get comments handler, and that's going to be a get comments handler. And then I'm going to add a add comments handler, which is going to be add comments handler. Okay, so I'm just importing what I just created. And then you can create HTTP functions using Pulumi. So, hey, Pulumi, I want to have an Azure HTTP function. It should be called that, so you remember it. The route for it should be comments. So when somebody posts to that endpoint, call this handler here. And I want to have a get one, as you can see here. And it's going to be, the route is going to be comments / and then the post ID. So I'm going to add the ID at the end here. And then if anybody does a get here, please call this method here. Very, very simple. Once I've defined my functions, I can then go and say, this is another one of these slightly longer pieces, but it's not much code. It's just very verbose. I'm creating what is called a multi-callback function app. So that's a thing that Pulumi has that supports us to create multiple functions in one app, and Pulumi will do all the work for us. So I'm going to tell it, here's the name the app function app in Azure, this thing here, put it into this resource group that I created up here. So my default resource group, that thing up here, name the project name. And then here are my functions. Please add these functions in there. Set it to only support HTTPS because I don't want stuff to fly over HTTP. It should always be TLS encoded. I'm adding some connection strings in here. And the cool thing here is when you create a connection string in a function app, this name here is going to be the name of the connection string, but then depending on what type you're putting in here, you end up with, as you can see here, custom conster underscore. That is going to be, so it uses that with conster underscore and then the name of the connection string to create the environment variable for you. So I'm setting up an environment variable for production, one for staging. I get the storage connection strings from my Pulumi stuff. So basically my production environment has a storage connection string. So I don't need to know anything. I just pick up whatever Azure gave me. Then I do some configuration here because by default there's no CORS. So I'm telling it that allowed origins is the production URL and the production environment and the staging environment, their URLs. So https://azurepagesdemo.0col.com. And finally, I just make this little change here telling it, hey, for HTTP functions, please don't add a route prefix for me. But by default, it does add a route prefix, which is kind of annoying. I don't want that. So this is then so what it's going to do is going to package up all of these functions into a zip file or some form of compressed file, add it to a blob storage account, create a function app, and set everything up for me. If I go back out here, I can once again go Pulumi up. Pulumi will now look at what happens when it runs the code I just created, and it's going to compare whatever that thing creates compared to what was in state. It's going to figure out that, hey, wait, these things are new. So it's going to see the multi-callback function app. It needs a storage account to store the functions in it. It needs an app service plan. It needs an app service to be able to run them. These are automatically configured to the pay-as-you-go, pay-per CPU thingy. Then it needs a container, storage container, and a blob storage or a storage blob to store my things in. I'm just going to go, yes. This is now going to create my function app for me. That's going to take a little while to do. And while that runs, let's look at this. So now I'm back in DevOps, and we can see that actually deployed to staging. That is kind of cool. So what we can do now is go back out here, and we can say Azure Pages Demo Staging zerocall.com. And if I browse to that, you can see there are a couple of really cool things here. If I refresh this, first of all, I just generated this. This is what I just built. I had Pulumi build the resources of the infrastructure for me. I had Azure create the website for me and deploy it to blob storage. And as you can see here, it's even using TLS, using a custom domain name, and that was Azure sorting all that out for me. And I can go around here and I can have a look at my blog posts, and they're all working, and the links are working, and all the code is in here. But the commenting section is missing, right? So in the background now, Pulumi is setting up, we can see that, it's setting up my function app, and it's almost done. What is missing now is the HTML for my functions, or sorry, for my comments. So I'm going to go into my site, I'm going to go to my layouts and to my post. This is going to be the layouts that's used for my blog post, duh. And in here, I'm just going to add a few little things. So I'm going to scroll down here, and this is where the content is being added. So I'm going down here, after my content, after my actual blog post, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some HTML. I'm adding a section in here, comments. It's a little form. It contains a name and a comment. Yes, people can spam my blog, but this is a demo. For real purposes, I would probably do some captcha or something like that in here. Then I have a little loading thing that's going to be shown before it shows the comments field. So basically, it's loading comments because that takes a little while because it needs to ask the function. Then there's a thank you thing that says thank you for a comment that will be shown once it's done with doing a comment. And then there's a container that contains all of my comments. So this is where I'm going to render my comments in there. This is going to look pretty crap, so I'm going to go and add some styles in here. And yes, this is all the CSS that I need. Just ignore it. It makes it look less than ugly, at least, hopefully. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a little polyfill in here. So in here, you see I'm adding a little polyfill for fetch. So not all browsers supports the fetch API. So to be able to support that, I'm pulling in a polyfill that will make sure that it works in IE as well. It works well in Chrome and Edge and so on. And the page ID I was talking about, or the post ID it's called in the handler, unfortunately, is actually, this is Jekyll's syntax for saying, get the path to this page, which is going to be like the domain name removed and then slash whatever the URL is going to be, but remove the first slash because I don't want to start with slash. So it's just going to be the post name. So if I go back out here, it's going to be I'm pulling out that as being the identifier for my my post. Then in here, I'm going to go and say, the first thing that happens when it comes in here, it calls fetch to the endpoint / page ID. And when I get my my comments back, it's going to go and it's going to remove the loading thing, so it doesn't say loading comments anymore. It's going to show the query form because that's hidden by the CSS by default. And then it's going to go through each one of the comments and add them to the page. And the way that it adds it to the page is by running this thing here. So it pulls out the comments container, which is that div here. And then it calls add pages for the comment. And then for each comment, it creates a little section, adds a CSS class, adds the date at the top, so we know when somebody commented. It adds the body and the commenter to each one of the comments. And it uses this simple HTML encode thingy to basically remove dangerous characters so we don't get cross-site scripting and stuff like that. And then finally, I call comments container.insert before to add it at the top. So it basically fills it from above and pushes everything down. So the latest comment is going to be at the top, which I find to be the most logical thing, in my opinion. It might not be, who cares? It's my blog, I decide. And finally, for this thing here is what I pasted in. So for posting, so basically adding a comment, I'm going to go, when the page loads, I'm pulling out the query form, and I'm going to listen to the submit event. So I have a form, there's a submit event, but I don't want it to submit. I want to prevent that from happening. So whenever somebody tries to submit the form, thus adding a post, I'm disabling the submit, I'm disabling the form by basically setting all the fields in the form to disabled. Then I use fetch again to do HTTP calls. I do a post, and I post my my comment, the post ID, the body, and the commenter to my Azure function. And once that comes back and says, oh, it's been added, that response contains JSON that is a comment. So then I can just go and say, hey, in that response, please go ahead and add the comment I just got back. And then also, yeah, I remove the query form. So once you've added a comment, I remove the form and I display the thank you note so that anybody who's added a form or added a comment can get a thank you. Okay, so that should be good to go. Oh, I need to do one thing. Sorry, I forgot to do this. I need to approve this, obviously. So I'm going to go into this thing. I'm going to review it because I think it was okay. I'm going to approve that to deploy to production. Okay, sorry about that. So now my old version is going to production. This is going to be my new version. This is my my version with commenting support. So I'm going to go to this thing here. I'm going to add the commenting support like that. And then I'm going to go out here and I'm going to say git push. That's going to push everything through. And unfortunately, I now obviously should have done this a little bit earlier because this takes a little while for it to run. But what's going to happen now, if we look at the pipelines, I'm going to have my Azure Pages pipeline. One of them is currently deploying to production. So that will be the one without commenting functionality. And then I have another run waiting here to deploy to staging, which is queued because this thing is running here. I go into this, I look into this. It is now going into purge CDN, which is kind of annoying because that does take a few minutes. And because of that, I'm actually going to see if I can cancel this. So it doesn't purge the CDN because I don't need that for this. Hopefully I can get this to stop doing the purge and instead go ahead and deploy my new version in here. But while that I'm waiting for this thing to deploy my new version to production, I can go back out here. We can go to Azure Pages demo.zerocall.com, and there it is. Here I have my production version of my website up and running, and I can click on things, I can navigate around. But once again, as I said, it doesn't have the commenting. So I do need my comments to go out, and I should have had that down here in my staging. So hopefully now we can see that my my new version is up and running. So we've got running Jekyll here now. That should hopefully pretty soon. Come on. Do a little dance here. Come on. So this is now going to run Jekyll. It's going to generate my code, add my code to a build artifact. See if I can. Oh, there it is. It locks up for some reason. So now it generated a site and then deploying to production. We can see that is now starting. It's funny how this thing kind of locks up once in a while, which I don't really know why. So it's doing pre-job publish site. It downloads my artifact for me, which is done automatically. Here is all of the stuff that was generated for me by my Jekyll script or my Jekyll container. Now it does a publish site, which should be pretty fast. Come on. Come on. I'm kind of jealous of people who work in DevOps and can, in some way, accept to sit and watch the screen while it's doing things. Because I've been doing DevOps stuff for a while now for different projects, and it's kind of this wait period when you just sit there and you look at the thing and you go, come on, it shouldn't be that hard. It should be done by now. But apparently I should just calm down and accept the fact that things do take a little bit of time. As soon as this starts running, it's actually very, very fast because the file copy is fast. But it needs to run it for me. Come on. Okay. Generally doesn't take this long. That part should be like really, really fast because all it should really do is run a publish to my container and it should be done. Publish to my blob storage. Here it is. Now it's installed my PowerShell stuff that I need. Sets up the Azure's resource manager context. It does an AC copy. Copies my entire website to the end, and there it is. Now it's deployed. And if we go back out here, we can now see that there's a deploy site to production waiting. If I go back out here, and here I can show you this as well. So what we can do is we can do Pulumi stack output, and we can pull up the values. So everything that was exported from my Pulumi script is now available in here, and the production or staging URL is that. So I can copy that. So we can get all of these old values. So when you get auto-generated things, you can just output them like this, and we can pull them out again. And there it is. It's all safe. It's secure. TLS is turned on. And if I scroll down through my web application here, at the end here, there are my comments. Somebody has already added a comment. That was really, really fast of you. Chuck Norris is ridiculously fast. So for the rest of you, I can show you that I'm going to get killed now, I know. But Chuck Norris is going to find me in my sleep and Freddy Krueger me. But there it is. So, and I get this thank you for your comment thing. And if I reload, you can see here it takes a little while, but it's actually really, really fast. It does take a little while. Once your functions have spun down because they haven't been used in a while, it does take a few seconds for it to show the comments, but it's pretty fast. And now it's really, really fast in here. So that is everything. And if I ever wanted to run this, you do get an email as well. And you just go in, you look at the email, you go, hey, review, this was fine, approve. And then all of a sudden it's going to start deploying to production with that nice feature of doing a CDN purge at the end. So even if there's a 10-minute CDN delay on it, it will purge that CDN, which takes about 10 minutes. So I don't know if it's actually valuable, but if you add a longer timeout to your CDN, then purging it at the end actually makes a lot of sense. So basically, we have now seen that using Pulumi, we can create our infrastructure as real code, which is really nice. It gives us a lot of flexibility and cool things we can do. And then once we had Pulumi set up our infrastructure, we could then use Azure pipelines to build things for us. And since I don't know Jekyll very well, there's a nice Docker container. I'll just use that, and that will do the static site generation for me. So I really love this new idea of, hey, I've got this thing that I want to build. Let's look at what services we have, how we can plug them together, and how we can get them to build whatever we need by just plugging things together and configuring them, and a little bit less code, which is, I guess, both good and bad. That was pretty much my entire demo or my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you some ideas of what you can do. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I don't know if we have any questions. Let's see, is there a chat in here?